Welcome to the Dark Nook Monster Shop. In this video, I'm sculpting a monster mass. Not to be confused with the monster mash, though honestly, I always thought that sounded kinda like a tasty British potato dish. No, I mean a mass of monsters. A writhing, tangled pile of creepy creatures. Something perfect for Halloween, something for horror art fans, and anyone who loves a DIY monster. To get started, I'll build an armature out of garden wire, twist it up for a little added strength, and then bulk it out with some aluminum foil. One of my favorite examples of a monster mass is in the movie In the Mouth of Madness. You only see it on screen for a couple of seconds and it's in low light, but it's awesome. It's that sort of classic Lovecraft-inspired design, so incomprehensible and chaotic that the human mind can't make heads or tails of it. Which is a great excuse for me to sculpt a monster that makes absolutely no sense. So, some wire, some foil, I wrap that up in masking tape. It's light, but surprisingly sturdy. For this build, my goal will be to use up the last of these tubs of foam clay. That's it, really. That's my goal. Use up the last of this stuff. I want to sculpt 4 or 5 different monsters all fused together in one sort of horrific blob. The first one, I'm going with something vaguely dragon-like, but I want this umbrella-style mouth full of teeth. I've always thought that that's a really creepy idea for a mouth. Kinda like a vampire squid. Have you ever seen one of those? They are freaky looking. I rough that out, then I add some eyes from my bits box. Pro tip, whenever you've got leftover foam clay, make some eyes, or some claws, or some teeth. Stockpiling these little monster bits saves you a ton of time later. I press in some of the pre-made teeth around the mouth and then sculpt the clay around those. This process is so much easier because the teeth are already dry, which makes it way easier to sculpt around them. With that monster all roughed out, I start coating the rest of the armature with clay. I start on the next creature by just shaping out a jaw. I'm not using any reference or sketches. This is pretty much improvised sculpting. This is 3D doodling. The eyes go in, more pre-made teeth. I blend in some clay to build up the brows and give him a nose. Then some more teeth because, hey, why not? I sculpt a long tongue by wrapping some floral wire in red foam clay. Now the dragon-eel, I decided to give him a mane, or maybe it's a fin. At this point, honestly, I don't know. I'm just sculpting to sculpt. Then I cut away some clay to make another mouth. I build up some gums and stick some more teeth into those and blend those teeth in and basically repeat that process. I dig away some clay and I poke some map tack push pins in for the eyes. Build up some clay around those and build up a brow to give him a nice angry scowl. Now for the next monster, I want to go with something insect-like. Big bug eyes, I stick some wire in to make mantis-style arms. I want this creature to have a big toothy mouth and huge spiky arms. And while I'm poking wire into this thing, I add a couple extra tentacles on the other side. I bulk it out by adding some foam clay to the arms, and then I stick little spikes in. And yeah, there's a mouth hole that looks a little too suggestive, so I gotta fill that thing in with teeth before YouTube makes me blur it. Now I want to make a weird hand. Kinda like a gorilla uses its hand for walking, except I want all the fingers to bend backwards the other direction, so that it can also grab while it's walking. I sculpt the segments and blend them in and sort of add claws and build them up a little bit and blend those off. Then I add some more spikes to the bug arms. And then I just generally bulk some things out in any areas that I feel are a little too thin or need a little more texture. Now I squeeze in one more monster on the back here. I shape out an eye stalk and press in the eye, and then I build a mouth. I stick some teeth into that clay, and then I blend it off using a stiff bristled paintbrush and a little bit of water. I texture, I add in a little more detail, and then I mix up a batch of foam clay and coat the whole thing in foam clay paste before painting. This helps blend any seams together where they might not have been smoothed enough, or if I want to add a little bit of texture to an area, there's a good way to do that now. Once this is dry, I base coated in black, and boy, even with just the black base coat, the silhouette of this thing looks really creepy, doesn't it? Now I'm using a painting technique that I saw on a channel called Grimdark Compendium. The link's in the description. Apparently the algorithm thought, hey, you might like this, and boy, it was right. It involves layering superglue and paint, and then distorting it with alcohol for a nice gnarly organic texture. First, I airbrush a mid-tone flesh color across the surface of the skin in a sort of zenithal way where I spray it mostly from the top. Then I spatter paint some warmer flesh tones in the nooks and crannies and recesses. And then I paint that all with superglue. Now you'll notice I'm using the applicator from the superglue to paint, which you really shouldn't do because it contaminates your superglue with paint. But because I'm using a tiny little bottle that I got at the dollar store and I'm going to use the whole bottle, it doesn't really matter if I contaminate it. But if you're using a bigger bottle of cyanoacrylate or superglue, just, pour out a little bit and be sure to use a brush that you don't mind destroying, because this will destroy a brush. Now my next step will be to add some dark blood reds, some purples, some shadows inside the mouth and around the eyes. And the cool part is, this paint doesn't stick to the layer of paint below it because that superglue is there. So it sticks to the superglue, not to the other paint. Alcohol breaks that paint glue bond, letting me smear, clump, and texture the surface. It creates this disgusting organic finish. It's really cool looking. Then I seal it again with more glue. And I add some blotchy flesh tones. Now I should point out that the Grimdark method was for painting resin miniatures, and now I'm using it on foam clay, so I don't really know if it's going to work. Then I mix a little blood red with some gloss Mod Podge to get a nice gooey bloody texture in the low points. I add a nice bone white to the teeth and the claws and the eyes. Brown wash brings out the details and kind of ties everything together. Then I go over that with my lightest flesh color to bring in some highlights. I add pupils. I add a little white to the tooth tips to get a nice gradient. I touch up the claws and the eyes a little bit here and there. And then finally, another blood red wash. And once that's dry, I add a little UV resin to the mouth and the eyes and the tongue. And then I blast it with UV light and cure it. And just like that, Monster Mass is complete. Thanks for checking out my video. If you enjoyed this foam clay monster tutorial, hit like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment down below.